What is up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Bourbon of the Week. My name's Chris. I'm going to be your host for today, and today we have the Old Forester 1897 Bottled in Bond. This comes in, obviously, at 100 proof. Don't know an age on this, non-age stated, but we know it's at least 4 years old because of the Bottled in Bond Act. We'll go over all that in a little bit because everybody knows before we get started, time for the traditional sip. That's sweet. So here we have our second Old Forester that we've put on this ranking sheet. We've done the 86 proof, which wasn't my favorite. That's like their bottom shelf stuff. We have the 1897. I have the 1910, the 1920, and as well as the Statesman that we'll get to eventually. Now, this bottle look is awesome. Love the whole Old Forester, old Prohibition style stuff. They actually switched them all to these white labels, including the 1910 and the 1920. So these are before all the label switchovers. Love the bottle, love the seal, everything like that. But this comes in at 100 proof. Obviously, being a bottled in bond has to be exactly 100 proof. Non-age stated, although we do know it's at least 4 years old. 72% corn, 18% rye, 10% malted barley, which is right in that wheelhouse that I love. I love like a high medium rye with a high medium proof. Wild Turkey is one of my favorite. That comes in at like 75% corn. So this coming in at 72% corn, I think the sweetness might be a little less, but at the same time, it's a perfect combination for a mash bill if you ask me. All that to be said, let's get into drinkability on this. At 100 proof, I do think that it is a little bit heavy on the ethanol. I don't think it's overwhelming. I don't think it's anything that you can't handle. It's just a slight little kick that I don't like being 100 proof. It almost drinks, I wouldn't say too much higher than 100, but if I were to sip this, I might guess a little bit over 100. Nothing crazy though, and I also believe that that 100 proof mark is right where it needs to be to keep the flavor profiles intact for this because the flavors are absolutely fantastic, which we're going to get to here in a little bit. So I'm going to give this like an 8.4 when it comes to drinkability. I don't think it deserves to be any lower than that, but I also don't want to put it up there quite near the 9s because there are definitely things that drink a lot easier than this, especially in that 100 proof range. 8.4. All that to be said, I wanted to get right into taste on this. I didn't want to harp on drinkability too much because the flavor profile on this is where this bottle shines. First of all, you're getting cherries right off the rip here. You get cherries in a lot of this Old Forester stuff. I'm finally being able to pick up the cherry notes because I have this bourbon nosing kit. Make sure you check out episode 1 and episode 2 on how to nose your bourbon. I'll put them up here or something. But this one, cherries right off the rip. Then you're getting a lot of those very traditional bourbon flavors, which I absolutely love. You're getting your vanilla, your caramel, your oak. The oak at the end is very dense yet subtle. It works so well. And the most fantastic part about this entire bottle is how it's balanced. So everything's so, like, all the flavors are so powerful. They're right in your face that you taste all of them. Nothing's hiding from you. It's not subtle as far as the cherries are right there, the oak's right there, the sweetness, and then the rye spice is right there, the black pepper. It's all right there. You can taste it. You can smell it off the rip. I just absolutely, everything's bold. It's not hiding. It's not weak or anything. They definitely don't do anything to this to water it down. I mean, they obviously do to get it to exactly 100 proof. But the fact that those flavor profiles can exist so well still is just fantastic. You take a sip of this, sweetness, rye, oak, caramel, everything, vanilla, even brown sugar for sure. All these flavors coming at you at once, and they're so powerful and so right up in their face that you can't even ignore them. That's the best part about this bottle, if you ask me. This flavor profile is so good. I got to take one more sip, then we'll give it a score. That cherry right off the front just really gives us a very good mouthfeel. A little bit drier of a mouthfeel than I remember when last time I drank this, but nothing like super dry or anything like that. I'm going to give this and this is a good one. I haven't had a score this high, I don't think, for taste, maybe ever, if not definitely in a long time. I'm going to give this like a 9.4 when it comes to taste. I would drop it a little bit lower. I don't want to, I think the Old Forester, the 1910, the 1920, people tell me they love it more. Definitely the Statesman, so I want to leave a little bit of wiggle room in case, you can't give something a perfect score. 9.4 though is going to be a great spot for this on taste. It is what it is. So last but not least, we're going to get into price on this. And this is a $50 bottle, which I think is a very fair spot for it. I don't think it deserves to be any more than $50, but I actually don't think, usually when I drink a bottle, I'm like, it's a little bit expensive for me. $50 isn't a tough ask. 100 proof, bottled in bond. It's at least 4 years old. Everything about this bottle is delicious. The drinkability is not too terrible, which is why we'll drop this score a little bit on price. But other than that, the taste profile, as I already mentioned, it's one of the top tastes that I've already had on this. So let's give this like a 8.6 when it comes to price on this. I think it's a fair spot for it. I don't think it deserves to be any higher than that just because the drinkability is a little bit high And $50 is right at that price point where you're kind of moving into a premium bourbon, if you ask me. Not too bad of a price, but at the same time, be better at $40, right? So while I add these scores up as usual, let's send it over to this week's Bourbon Bomb of the Week and learn a little bit more about the Brown-Foreman Distillery, because there's some things that I didn't know. Let's do this. So for this week's Bourbon Bomb of the Week, we're going to go over the history behind Brown-Foreman Distillery, which actually started out in the 1870s as JTS Brown from a gentleman named George Garvin Brown, a pharmaceutical sales rep at the time. He then entered a partnership with George Foreman, who isn't the boxer, and they started Brown-Foreman Distillery. This brings us up to about the 1900s, where they actually made their first acquisition, which was Early Times. You guys might know Early Times Bottled and Bond. It's a favorite in a lot of people's collections. Well, obviously Prohibition hit and they got their medical license, blah, 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 just like every other distillery at the time. This brings us up to the 1940s, and in 1941, you guys might know about a big thing called World War II, where they started producing alcohol for the war efforts, which made them a lot of money, just like a lot of other people at the time. In 1953, Early Times became the #1 bourbon in the country, which is crazy because I have some Early Times. But it's not the Bottled and Bond, and it's not the bourbon. This is a 1.75 liter bottle, plastic, Kentucky straight bourbon, and it's what I've been taking shots of for the past 6 months because I can't seem to get rid of it. I bought this before I knew anything about bourbon. I heard Early Times was good. That's what I got. Anyway, this brings us up to 1956, where they actually acquired Jack Daniels. Now, this is one thing that I just found out. I did not know Jack Daniels was owned by Brown-Foreman Distillery. It's one of my favorite shot-taking bourbons. You might not think it's a bourbon. It's a bourbon. You can call it Tennessee whiskey if you want. Technically, it's a bourbon. We'll go over that in another episode. But anyway, they own Jack Daniels. Who would have thought? Between 1956 and 1996, they acquire everything that you can think of. Wine companies, gin companies, vodka companies, all kinds of stuff. And in 1996, Brown-Foreman acquires Woodford Reserve. Now, I have a little bit of Woodford behind me. I have the... what do we have? I have the double oaked, which a lot of people like. I have the Masters collection. And we just ran out of the Woodford Reserve original. So I also didn't know that they owned Woodford Reserve. Woodford, Old Forester, Jack Daniels. This company basically has it all and a lot of good stuff behind it. But then between 1996 and now in 2021, all they've done is acquired more and more companies. So they're huge. They're not going anywhere. And this Old Forester is delicious. So that's just a little bit of a history behind Brown-Foreman. Do with it what you may. Drink the good stuff. Old Forester, Woodford Reserve. Take shots of Jack Daniels with me. Cheers. So that's just a little bit of the history behind Brown-Foreman. There's a lot more behind it that I didn't want to get into on this. But we're going to drop this in at an 8.83, which is actually going to put it third on our list. A very surprising spot for this. Knocking Granny's batch, Booker's, one of my favorites, from Jim Beam, down a notch to fourth. Soon that's going to be in like 10th, especially when we get into the Statesman in the 1910 and the 1920. But an 8.83 is not a bad spot for this. I'm interested to see if one of them can take the top. If that Statesman or that 1910 can come over and take over Henry McKenna, we're going to have a problem because that's definitely one of my favorites. 8.83, not a bad spot for it. That's all for this week, though. Make sure you check me out on Instagram at Bourbon of the Week. We drop an image of the bourbon that we're going to review. You can go on Guess the Score. If you guess the closest, you'll get a shout out on the channel, as well as entered in a monthly drawing to win some cool prizes. Scroll down below, check out our Patreon, and come chat with us in Discord. Tell me what you're drinking on tonight. Tell me some of your favorites. We got a bunch of people in there chatting bourbon, whiskey, all kinds of stuff all the time. But in the meantime, don't drink and drive. Drink responsibly. Stay healthy, stay happy, stay drinking. Cheers, y'all.